Okay, so what we're going to do is open this file, and you can see how dark this is, and so we want to use the dynamic range tools. We use this basic panel right here, and you're going to adjust the shadows, so increase it to 100, and then we're going to also need to bring the blacks, adjust it up so that we can get more detail. And then you'll notice that the highlights are sort of a little bit, it's a little funky and blown out, so we'll adjust that so that we start to get, you know, a little bit more depth, okay? And then because of what's just happened, we actually need to increase the vibrance so that the color really starts to come out a little bit more. You can see those pinks in there, so we're going to turn the vibrance up as well. And then it really starts to look more like a real sunset, okay? And now what we need to do is adjust the sort of the gradient that's happening with this graduated filter up in the sky and the hill range. So you can see here's the switch to the graduated filter, and we're going to adjust the temperature. Actually, first of all, you can double click these to set them back to 0, but I'm going to adjust this up a little bit, and if you play with this you can kind of see some of the changes, and so I'll make these adjustments, and I'm going to take my graduated filter tool and I'm going to start drawing about here and click and hold and drag down to about maybe a third into the top of the hill or so. All right, and then what it's going to allow is this gradual adjustment of the next things I'm going to do. So I'm going to adjust the clarity, all right, and I'm going to increase that significantly, and it starts to give you a little bit more detail in there. And then the other thing I'm going to adjust is the contrast, and you can see more really dramatic changes if you kind of play with it, but we don't want to take it either way too deeply, because then you'll get a lot of noise. All right, and so the other thing is, let's go over here to the adjustment brush. Oh, and if you want to see, it actually does remember that gradual adjustment right there. If you were to click back, okay, and select it, you can make adjustments. But let's go to the adjustment brush. And what we need to do is turn on the mask, and we're going to start to paint in a mask in the bottom, like in the lake area, because we want to make some effective changes there. So, all right, if I go ahead and change the feather to 50, it's going to give me a nice soft edge. Yeah, so if I start drawing down, oh, and I didn't change it. See, this looks like I'm drawing on it. What you can do is come down here and change the mask color to, I like the sort of red color because it's traditional. So if yours didn't start off as red, then you can go back and you can make that modification. Okay, so I'm going to just paint down in here, and don't worry if you get too much up in the hills, then you can always come back later and you can erase it. Okay, so I'm going to keep adding to this and get it so that it's sort of soft. I might be getting a little bit too much into the hills, but I'll go back and erase it. I want to make sure that it's nice and heavy in the water area though. Okay, so it's probably pretty good. Now let's go back to the erase tool. I'm going to change the brush size so I can control it better, and I'll give it a little bit of a feather. And you can see that I'm starting to pull some of that material out. Let's keep going in there. And I might have gone a little bit heavy, so you could sort of play around with this, but when I say I might have gone a little bit heavy, it's harder for me to see kind of through some of that, and it's easy to get into the water. So what I'll do is I'll get the majority of this stuff out where I can definitely see the delineation between the shoreline and the water, and then I'll probably adjust my feather to make it a little bit bigger, make some more adjustments. Just a second. Let me get some of this other stuff. Kind of clean this up in here. And there's like a little bump up in there I can get. Just keep going. Oh, and I need to undo that actually. Okay. All right. And so there's a little ridge right there. I need to soften. Okay. So now I want to go ahead and to add, click add again, and I'm going to change the size. All right, and so that I can start to feather that edge. Let's adjust the feather too so it's not so heavy. And I can control it just a little bit more, increase the size a little bit. All right, and so then that way you get this little soft haze on the edge, but it doesn't go like deeply into the water, into the trees. Okay, so it's almost like a very soft haze edge. Okay. All right, and so once you get that made, what you want to do is come down and just turn the visibility of the mask off so that we can see the changes that we're going to make, and come back up in here in your adjustment panels. Excuse me. And you're going to look for, let's see, where is it? There we go. Yeah, clarity. You're going to adjust the clarity a little bit, and you're going to start to see some changes. And then let's also take the contrast, and you can, like I said before, you can like really monkey with the contrast to see what you want to, like which direction to take it. But anyway, we're going to just lower the contrast a tiny bit so that it starts to change and it gets a little bit brighter. Okay. And let's also adjust the temperature so that the color is more water-like, right? And you can start to see that it gets some of that blue in there. And then we can also adjust the tint a little bit so that it still brings some of that magenta back, just a little up in the, yeah, so it's a little bit more of a reflection of the color in the sky. And somewhere in there, anyway, you can also type the value in if you know what number you want. Okay, and now what we need to do is get this hill area, and we need to create an adjustment layer for, or mask for that. So I'm going to reset my values, and the lesson actually is going to tell you to reset all your values. I want to show you something if you run into that problem. There's a problem you might run into. I'm going to turn the mask on, and I also want to turn on auto mask. And auto mask is going to help me find the edges of things that are distinct, like really easily, which is nice, like the hills, at least the top of the hill. So I'm going to adjust my brush size. Now this, if you get this when you start, it's telling you need to make at least one adjustment. Oh, I need to, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to find like clarity or something, and then just type like a 1. So it's like just barely making a change, but then it'll actually let me go in there. So if you have that problem, then you can go ahead and do what I just did. And so I'm kind of being cautious around the bottom and of the thing, and then like you can see up here, if I can be really cautious if I want, but I really need to be cautious at the bottom because the bottom doesn't have such a clear and distinct edge the way that the top does against the sky, right? So things sort of bleed in the bottom a little bit. And so I'm not going down to the very edge on the bottom because I'm going to probably take a feathered edge brush so that it can be a little bit softer. Okay, anyway, but I just want to keep filling this in, and let's just keep going. And if your brush, like my brush is acting just a little bit laggy, but if your brush is doing that, then, you know, just be patient with it. Anyway, so I'm going to adjust the feather here, and I want to show you what happens up at this top edge. Even though I've got that big soft feather, see how it like catches it at the edge, right? So if I catch it at the edge, then I don't have to worry that it is going to go up into the sky, right? And because that's something where it really would matter. And it's because that auto mask, right? And so, but now I do want to sort of softly feather some of the bottom a little bit. And some of the bottom, like even some of the bottom, whenever I go back down there and do it, you'll notice that the feathered edge will still kind of catch some of the edges a little bit, and it kind of did in the tree, but having that feather is good because then it really helps me adjust it a lot more. And so I'm gonna adjust my feather so that it's heavier, and then that way it's a little bit softer down there, and it'll blend in a little bit better when I make my adjustments. I just go along the edge, and you know, you can play with this in some different ways just to kind of experiment and see what happens so that you have a better understanding of what the tool is capable of doing. Okay, so, all right. Okay, so I think that that's probably a pretty good selection. And what I want to do now, excuse me, is, oh, before I adjust the shadows, I need to turn off the mask. All right, now I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to adjust the shadows so that I can start to pull some of the definition out a little bit more, and now I need to adjust the exposure. And you can see it brightening up there in the center. All right, and so that really starts to pull it out, sort of like there's this either dusk, but it's probably more like a well, dusky light or a dawn light, whichever you want to look at it, depending on how it was shot. All right, and so we can just make some more adjustments. Okay. Now it tells you to adjust or to click the adjustment layer to deselect it, but it doesn't really work. All right, so if you click something else, then you can go over here now to the tab and get the detail tab. All right, and then we want to be able to sharpen this and pull some of the detail out. So you're going to adjust the scrubber and that says amount in the detail sharpening panel. And it's going to be kind of hard, actually. Probably if you were to blow this up, you'd see it a lot better. But you know, don't want to sharpen it too much because you're going to end up getting a lot of noise in the bright spots, like especially in the sky. So one of the things that you can do, it's kind of cool, is if you click masking and you hold down the Option key or the Alt key in Windows, then it will show you like the black parts, and you can see down below when I press Option how the bottom buttons change, and then it's showing you in white are the places that are going to be sharpened significantly, and so you want to make sure to knock out as much of the sky kind of as possible. And then if I let up off the tools, you see it goes back to this, right? So if I want to get that back again, I need to do Option, and then I need to click that scrubber, and I can start to make some more adjustments if I wish, right? So I can adjust this and maybe push it up to, I don't know, 75 or so, somewhere in there, and you can see more of the sky falling out, which is good. It won't sharpen it too much. Okay, and then I let off of that, and then you can see that my buttons down at the bottom change again. So so that's a really great way of isolating what you're sharpening really easily whenever you're doing raw stuff. And I want to change the luminance so that it has a sort of more of a light effect. All right, it has a little bit more brightness, but not literally just brightness, but like luminance, right, which is the way that the light is going to sort of come in and filter through colors. Now, if I wanted to be able to do a little bit of repair, I can do some of that non-destructive repair in here. And so you can see if I blow it up a lot, there's this very small little speck of dust or something that would have been on the lens maybe. And so I can take my heal tool. All right, and then I'm going to adjust the size. You don't want the size to be too big. Actually, I need to adjust the feather. The size is okay. So I'll drop the feather down. All right, and I can just click right there, and it's going to take a sample from up there, and you see that it heals it for me, which is great. All right, and then you can kind of play around and see if there are other places that need to be repaired. And yeah, so I'm going to just sort of blow this up a little bit more, zoom out, and try to pan around and see if there's anything that's important. And those look like specks, but really they're just birds. We'll deal with those a little bit later. And sort of, you can just keep looking around your document and see kind of what needs to change, okay? And you know, if I wanted to come in here and get this bird off, you can see that it starts getting a little bit tricky. That might be just fine. I mean, you know, if you didn't mind having that extra sort of whatever, probably distant tree detail on the horizon, that would be okay to have. But you know, you can monkey around with trying to fix this. And one of the things you might notice is that sometimes the healing tools in Camera Raw, like here, they're not they're not as I should say, oh, I keep adjusting the wrong thing. They're not as powerful as some of the tools with the healing tools in Photoshop when you actually open the document. So like I've got now this bright spot on the horizon. So you can see that there might be some things like where the healing tool is just not really going to be the right thing, you know. And if I come in there and I try to grab this little spot, and then I can also increase it to see what happens then, and it'll probably increase the white spot, size of the white spot. So anyway, yeah, so you can kind of figure out however you want to do this, but I just want to show you that there's some things that you can do simply to heal things here, and there are others that you're probably going to want to do like in Photoshop once you open the image up. Okay, so looks like now probably the next thing we want to do is put a vignette on this so that it kind of draws your eyes more into the picture. And let's go ahead and do that. So you need to choose the radial filter tool, and then make sure to go ahead and set all of your settings. Well, you don't have to set your settings back to 0. Just make sure that it's set to outside down at the bottom of the panel where it says effect. And then you're going to get much in the center as you can kind of get. And then holding option, you're going to pull it out until you get to kind of the bellows effect that you want, you know, the vignetting effect that you want. And then when you release it, what you're going to do is to make the change and to flip it, you're going to adjust the exposure. So I'll come back over here in this panel and I will change the exposure. So I need to reduce the exposure a little bit. All right, and so now I could be done with this, but one of the things that you can do is you can open this in Photoshop and get rid of like the power lines and stuff. So if you hold down Shift and you click on Open Image, you can see the little dialog box here. It's going to open it as a smart object, which is what I want, because then it'll still be non-destructive. And so I can do better healing and cloning in Photoshop non-destructively to get rid of those power lines than I probably could have like in RAW. So what I'm going to do now, excuse me, is actually I need to reset my workspace. So if I don't know what I was doing before, but if I want to go to Window and Workspace Essentials, it's already on Essentials. So actually, what I need to do is go back and reset my Essential Workspace. So let's go up there and let's do Workspace and then choose Reset Essentials. Okay, so and I don't need my library open, so I'll collapse that. All right, now I've got my layers over here, and you see it brought it in as a smart object. And I've got my picture here, and I'm going to click on a new layer. I'm just going to make a blank layer, and I'm just going to call it like corrections or something. And then what I can do is I can use that layer while I've got like the healing tool. I'm not going to, like that's the healing brush tool. But actually I want the spot healing tool. And you can also use the clone tool this way, but what we'll do is we'll choose like the spot healing tool, and then up in the options panel, go and click on sample all layers. And then that way, whenever you make adjustments to the corrections layer, it'll act as if it's adjusting the layer on the bottom, and it blends the layers together without actually destructively modifying the layer beneath it, which is a smart object. Okay, so what you'll do with this healing tool is you'll just take it and you'll draw a line to get rid of these power lines. And occasionally what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to change the size of your brush. So I need to, if I increase my brush, I can get both of those power lines, and you can see how sort of simple that is. And you might have to kind of go back in a few places and make some slight modifications. And lets me get rid of the birds too. And anyway, so you can just drag. Now, as you start to get closer and closer to the hills, you might start noticing that things will double up, or they'll start to, you know, blend in together. So like I need to undo that, and I probably ought to change my brush size, make it smaller, right, so that I'm not picking up so much surrounding information, All right, I can go back and make a few more little adjustments. And you also want to make sure that you're not making it look smeared, right? Because sometimes oversampling from an area can sort of get this smeary, smudgy effect. So I'm going to expand this so I can see better what I'm doing. All right, and let's get this to be a lot smaller so I can get a lot closer to the mountain without having to use my clone tool. All right, and I can get pretty close to it without it being a problem. And I need to get in there a little bit. And I'll come back to that other little spot near that small peak down below. But I don't think that my clone tool is going to handle that very well. Okay. And let's go back here and see. Yeah, I'm just sort of looking around to see where else I might have some stuff. And these places, like where the color's changing, like there's a little green there, and it gets sort of like a taupe and then a mauve color. You probably don't want to do one big long swoosh across it with a small spot healing tool brush. You know, probably want to do little sections in some places. So make sure that it's set to all layers on the clone tool, and let's get the brush size down smaller. And let's sample, whoops, sorry, I need to hold down Option, and we're going to Option or Alt sample, and then we can click to apply it. So you hold down Alt, Option, right, to take a sample of a nearby set of pixels, and then you're going to, every time I click, it's cloning them, okay? And do that one too. And some of this stuff I can probably do with the healing brush, but like a lot of the stuff that's really close to the mountains, you might need to come in there with your clone tool. And I already know that like right up next to the mountain, I can go ahead and just assume that it needs to be done with the clone. And you notice that I'm taking lots of samples. With the clone tool, one of the things that you can do is you can take one sample and then sort of click and drag it. And sometimes that's fine. And that's sort of essentially what the spot healing tool does, is it's sort of like the clone tool a little bit. It's a little bit more content aware. But it takes a sample and then you click and drag, and right. But in a lot of cases with the clone tool, just having the patience to truly deal with the minutia is how you really get good results. And so I'm going to blow it out so that I can actually see those lines better. And let's go back here with the healing brush tool, and you can just see that I'm kind of working through this. You can probably speed me up a little bit, but there are going to be places, you know, where I'll probably end up smudging it a little bit, and I need to kind of undo it and go back and change the brush sizes. And anyway, I'm just kind of talking through while I work right now. Okay. All right, and so there are probably a couple places where I could go back and be a little bit more diligent, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'm kind of going a little bit faster than I would if it were something that was really important. Now there's a little bit of a line, so I can actually, instead of undoing it, I'll just take a bigger brush and start to blend it together. All right, and so, and the way I'm going back and forth between my brush sizes, I'm doing, to make it smaller, I do a close, or excuse me, I do the left or open, so left square bracket. And to make a brush bigger, I do the closed or the right square bracket. Okay. You can also click and hold while you're holding Option in different directions, or Alt. Yeah, the brackets, if you just want to click through sizes, are really easy. Here I'm using clone tool to get close to the mountains. All right, so a lot of this is a little bit of tedium, but it can kind of go quickly, right? So especially goes quickly if you're not having to constantly use your mouse to go up and change the brush size through the menus. If you just use the shortcuts, it makes a huge difference in time savings. Like seeing these little short bursts, so it doesn't smudge and it doesn't drag other pixel information from another place. Okay, and let's just go ahead and finish getting rid of all of these lines. And then I want to come from the other direction right there so that it doesn't drag the purple into the pink, right? And then I'll come in here. Okay, I want to get these little lines. Okay, we'll get this line and down in there. And okay, so I'm going to increase my brush size, and now I can start getting rid of larger chunks of this thing. And I'm going to undo that. That was too much. And then I can treat this as a great big line, right? And so it'll actually fix that properly. Okay, because it's doing content aware. If you look up in the the options panel, you can remember that we've got content aware chosen as the sampling type. And then I can just start to click in some of these places to get rid of that, and then it just replaces it with like branches and, you know, tree information. That's a little bit overkill. Undo that. Okay, and I think I'm okay with that section, right? So this is where I could kind of go back and look, and up on the horizon there's that one thing that's sticking up right there. So let's go back and get rid of that now that we're not, you know, specifically dealing with the lines anymore, and then that's gone. Okay, and then you can just start to sort of look around and, you know, yep, and we've got a little bit of artifacting up here from making those color adjustments and, you know, luminance and brightness and things like that, contrast. So if I start to sample in there, it'll get rid of some of those bright white spots that are kind of buried in those trees. And so you can kind of use the healing tool for that as well. And we've got a little bit of haloing in these trees as well. And so you want to be careful not to overuse this though, because then it can start to like cloud it up, muddy it up. Okay, and that's, I think, pretty good. And then, you know, if you look at where we started with that very, very dark picture, we're in a pretty good place right now. So I just need to go and save this. And I'm going to call it, if it was called before, I'm going to call it spillers_after. Make sure that I've got my work saved. And I probably should have been saving all the way through, but, you know. Anyway, all right, and so that's it.